Already, a couple SEC football coaches are on the proverbial hot seat, and the season hasn't even started yet. That's just life in the SEC in the year 2024. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, as we sit here about a month before the season, I think it's fair to say that 2, maybe 3 coaches are on the hot seat at this point, and that maybe by the end of the season, or by the month of November anyway, 4 or perhaps even 5 coaches could become on the hot seat, because you just never know throughout the course of the season. Someone who seemingly is not on the hot seat at the season's beginning can work their way onto it, either with their performance on the field or sometimes with some shenanigans off the field. But we're going to get into some of that hot seat conversation today and closely examine 4 coaches who we consider either to be already on the hot seat today or to be hot seat adjacent, where depending on how things go this season on the field, these guys could work their way onto the hot seat and perhaps into a firing scenario. So let's outline the parameters here. As we see it, the 4 guys we're going to look at today are Clark Lea from Vanderbilt, Sam Pittman from Arkansas, Billy Napier from Florida, and Shane Beamer from South Carolina. Before we get to these 4, though, John, aside from this quartet that are either hot seat or hot seat adjacent, do you see anyone as maybe being right near these 4, as kind of being in the on-deck circle of, we're not going to discuss them today, they're not on the hot seat at this moment, but keep an eye on these guys maybe throughout the course of the season, or at least into 2025 as maybe, stepping up to the plate into the hot seat in the future?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the hot seat is never that far away. You just might not talk about it. You just kind of keep it in a closet, but it's there in the house. I mean, it can appear very quickly. So I think you look at say Oklahoma, Brent Venables. Now, he may lead the Sooners to a playoff against a brutal schedule. That's unlikely. But he starts out 6-7 or 5-7 first year, lost 7 games, I think. And then last year bounces back with 10 wins. But a losing season at Oklahoma creates an image, and that's not a good image. And Oklahoma doesn't have a history of suffering through ineffective coaches. So it may turn out to be an aberration. He's got a really good defense back this year, and he's a defensive-minded coach. So he may be fine. He may get a contract extension. But to your point, you're always not that far away. Even we've seen it happen before with coaches who, not that far removed from a national championship, suddenly appear on the hot seat. Gene Chizik comes to mind at Auburn. Another coach maybe that fits that criterion would be Hugh Freeze at Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Hugh Freeze, I thought that was a really good hire for Auburn. Auburn is not flourishing at this moment, but he didn't come in and have a winning season. That's always a problem when you come in. I mean, you have expectations at these programs, so he may bounce back from that and do very well. Auburn has a ways to go. He's recruiting well. However, those are just 2 examples. But there's also, as you brought up, off the field shenanigans that covers a wide range of shortcomings. We never know when that might happen.
Yeah, there's always that wild card, but to the point of the 2 guys you're discussing, with Venables, it was 6-7 in year 1. Last year improved to 10-3. However, that 10-3 does come with a little bit of an asterisk, I think, because they started 7-0. Middle of the season, Oklahoma was firmly in the playoff hunt. They'd beat Texas. It seemed like Venables, whatever whatever inconsistencies he had in year one and whatever reason he gave fans to doubt him in year one, seemed like he'd put them to bed after 7 games last season. But then he goes 3-3 down the stretch. So even though they finished 10-3, I feel like it was a 10-3 that kind of left a sour taste in the mouth of some Sooners fans, because it was the potential to do so much more after a 7-0 start, and then to go 3-3 down the stretch on the heels of that 6-7 season. I think they're overall a better roster here in year 3. I do wonder about how much they'll miss Dillon Gabriel at quarterback. I know Jackson Arnold is talented, but I don't know that he'll perform to the level of Dillon Gabriel in his first season as Oklahoma's starter. And as you mentioned, a brutal schedule here this season. So I don't think Venables is a guy that will wind up on the hot seat this year, but he could, if he has a fair to Midland season here in year 1 in the SEC, I think he could go into a very important 2025 season a year from now. And with Hugh Freeze, I sort of look at it the same way. Auburn fired Brian Harsin before he even got through 2 seasons. I don't think they will be quite so quick to move on from Hugh Freeze. But if Hugh doesn't have a bounce back year in his second season on the heels of 6-7, like Venables, I could see him going into 2025, which would be Freeze's year 3, facing sort of a make or break type of season for him. So I think those are 2 guys that, you're right, are very fair to put in that on deck circle, where it's probably a long shot or unlikely that those schools would make a move on either of those guys this season. Even if this season, is a pretty average season for those 2 programs, I don't think those programs would make a move now, but it would, increase the pressure, increase, the win or go home nature of 2025, I think. So we'll revisit Venables and Freeze perhaps in the future. But let's get on to our first hot seat candidate for this season. John, let's start the conversation with Vanderbilt and Clark Lea. We know Vanderbilt is the toughest job in the SEC, but Clark Lea has made it look as tough as possible, right? This is someone that through 3 seasons, the Vanderbilt alum has a 9-27 record in 2 of his 3 seasons. He has not managed to win a conference game, and I don't really see the situation getting much better, if at all, this year. And so, I know it's a tough job. I know it's not going to attract the highest level of candidate. And I know Vanderbilt at times seems to forget that it even has a football program, but they are doing stadium renovations. They did fire Derek Mason in the middle of a pandemic, when some speculated that not many programs would be firing their coaches. Well, multiple SEC schools fired their coach, including Vanderbilt, which makes me think that, hey, even Vanderbilt will wake up sometimes if things get bad enough and fire their coach. So what's your ruling on Clark Lea? Does he survive this season? If he doesn't, do you have a date in mind where Vanderbilt would make a coaching change and move on from Clark Lea in year 4?
Well, I do think he will survive this season, but I also have a date in mind.
Okay.
I'm looking at December 1st, 2025.
So that would be after the regular season finale, which for Vanderbilt would be the season finale against Tennessee, not this year, but next year. You think he gets this season? You think he gets a 5th season? You're saying it's not going to improve in year 5, and after the Tennessee game next year in 2025, that would be curtains for Clark. Thanks for your services. Still a cherished Vanderbilt alum, but a Vanderbilt alum who no longer has a job at his alma mater.
I noticed that Clark Lea at the SEC Media Days and his time on center stage complimented his athletic director a number of times. I thought establishing goodwill was so important. I don't think he talked much about the stadium renovation. I would have recommended that as a talking point rather than going deep into the roster. I think there's a possibility that after next season, he could have 4 winless SEC seasons in 5 years, which would be even a new low for Vanderbilt. And I'm not saying Clark Lea's a horrible coach. I don't know. You can't tell based on what somebody does at Vanderbilt. He had a reputation as a good defensive coach, but you can have a defensive mastermind and still give a lot of points at Vanderbilt. So it's just hard to say, but I think Vanderbilt at some point has to say, yeah, we're aware that our program is not faring well, and we're committed to getting better and staying in the SEC and being a viable member. And so we know we have to fire a coach every now and then and start anew and extend our life in this conference. But let's face it, I mean, when you add Oklahoma and Texas to the league, it's not like Vanderbilt needed any more challenges. And now that just makes two other programs ahead of it. It went from being the 14th best program in the conference to the 16th best program in the conference. And no matter what they finally do with those cranes behind the stadium, that's just not going to keep a coach employed for long.
So you're thinking he gets a fifth season. I'm thinking Vanderbilt wakes up and moves on this year. And I know, I think is Vanderbilt really going to fire Clark Lea after just 4 seasons? But we have seen, in the past. I mean, yeah, Derek Mason. What did he got 6 seasons, or I believe it was 7 actually. Mason got 7 seasons, but that clock was extended by a couple bowl game appearances. Vanderbilt made a bowl twice during Derek Mason's tenure. They beat Tennessee a few times during that stretch. I mean, Clark Lea doesn't have that on the resume. I know it's a tough job, but you got to scratch and claw your way to a bowl game once every 3 or 4 seasons. I think at Vanderbilt, if you want to extend the clock. I mean, Bobby Johnson made a bowl game 1 year, and he extended his clock another season thanks to that bowl appearance. Derek Mason, I mentioned, made a couple bowl games. I mean, nobody's done it like James Franklin has in his stretch. That was really unprecedented at Vanderbilt and is not going to happen again. But I think even playing to the Derek Mason level of success, because Clark Lea has failed to match that bar, I think I don't think they fire him before the end of the season, but I think after the Tennessee game this year, Vanderbilt will have another winless conference season. I think they'll be sitting at 3-9 with 3 winless seasons in the SEC in a 4-year stretch. So I think December 1st of 2024 this year is when Clark Lea's tenure ends at Vanderbilt after 4 seasons. So I have him getting fired exactly 1 calendar year ahead of your timeline.
Well, I think the November, I'm looking at its schedule, and I don't see his best shot for a win in the SEC probably would be on November 9th against South Carolina. Cranes high, anchors down on that day. So that could be do you believe it? You've got a date in mind. Do you believe if he wins an SEC game, he's good?
I think if he wins one, I think if he wins one SEC game, that could be the bar. You go 1-7 in the SEC, you could be good. I mean, that's the thing with Vanderbilt, right? Like, we're talking about how tough a job this is, but we're not saying he has to go out and be 8-4. Like, just go win an SEC game. Something he failed to do in year 1, something he failed to do in year 3. I think the other thing, John, is sometimes you make a coaching change. It used to be you make a change just to quiet the masses and to make it for the sake of making a change, right? But now, with NIL being so important to the sport, I think sometimes change is necessary to galvanize your NIL. And I don't know what the ins and outs of what Vanderbilt has going on in NIL under Clark Lea. I question whether it's all that much, but I think when you have a floundering coach and the future's not particularly bright with that coach, and you think, okay, if he's not fired now, he's probably going to be fired a year from now. I think that's a hard sales pitch to galvanize your NIL fundraising. It's like trying to do political fundraising for a candidate whom you know is going to lose. It's a little hard sometimes to raise the funds. Sometimes you need to turn the page and just put a fresh face in there and maybe galvanize some NIL fundraising. And I think that could be an argument to move on from Clark Lea as well. You don't know if it's going to be better, but you sort of know what the status quo looks like, and the status quo doesn't look good.
How can you imagine yourself is involved with Vanderbilt, and as an AD, for example, and going to, how could you maintain a straight face going to a NIL prospect and saying, hey, we want to, we really need to, we think we've got some momentum here. We think we're up and coming with the stadium renovation, and we want you to be a part of this. And so we'll give you an opportunity to contribute to our NIL fund. How could you do that with a straight face? You think you could?
I think it's hard with Clark Lea. I think if you have an exciting new coach in there and you can put a new face on this and sell the idea that the future is going to be brighter with a new coach. I mean, you can make fans and donors believe anything with a new coach, right? I mean, even a coach, we've seen this time and time again. The fan base gets their heart set on a particular candidate. Inevitably, they don't get that candidate. And then within 2 weeks, they're all in on whoever the school hired. They've convinced themselves that no, the candidate that the fans wanted all along, oh, yeah, he probably wouldn't have been the best guy for the job. This guy that is hired is the best guy for the job. You can do that with a new coach. Now, it might be fool's gold. It might be a crock. This new coach is going to be better than the last, but you can sell that. You can't sell that at the end of a fourth season in which Vanderbilt goes 3-9 again. So if you're trying to sell that idea that hey, open up the purse strings and donate to NIL, I think that's much easier to do with a first-year coach who's 0-0 on the job than a guy who could be 12-35 on the job, which is where Clark Lea could be after this season. So let's leave Vanderbilt behind and move on to candidate number 2, and that is Shane Beamer at South Carolina. Now, Shane Beamer's coming into year 4, and his first 2 seasons went pretty well. Went 7-6 in year 1, and it's not like he inherited a great situation. He made the most of it, in part by bringing in Spencer Rattler. Winning season in year 1. Deserved a lot of acclaim and praise for that. Year 2 goes 8-5. Okay, Shane Beamer's looking okay. But then year 3, a year of regression. Just 5-7 last year. So now enters sort of a fork in the road moment here, I think, in his 4th season. So where do you stand on Shane Beamer? Does he make it to 2025, or does South Carolina fire Shane Beamer in his 4th season?
No, I don't think he'll make it to 2025. I would see him after the day after the Clemson game. One of the things Shane Beamer's done, he's pulled off some upsets. He beat Clemson a couple of years ago. He beat Tennessee when Tennessee was still in the running for a playoff berth in 2022, beat him 63-38. Shane Beamer has these kind of odd games that you think, where did that come from? But even when he has those games and when he has an upturn as he did in 22, I don't know if the fan base feels very confident is where the program is headed, because he's also had some bad losses. I just think it's really, there's hasn't been any consistency. And as you pointed out, as a coach, you want to be going upward. You don't want to be going downward. Wherever you start, you need to move up from that. And that's going to be challenging for him after this game. So I think this season, I think you would give him the Clemson game and say, okay, if he can beat our arch rival, we'll keep him around. And I'm not saying that's impossible, but I would favor Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something there. He almost set on the bar too high his first 2 seasons. He won 15 games first 2 years. I think if you would have set the over-under on how many games South Carolina and Shane Beamer would win through his first 2 seasons, I would say over-under probably would have been about 12.5, averaging about 6 wins per season. The fact that he won 15, he exceeded what I think the over-under would have been through years 1 and 2. But the problem is he set that bar at a certain standard. He almost set the bar too high, too fast. And now in years 3 and 4, I think he's undergoing regression, and that's a tough narrative to survive. But I do think I'm going to go the other way. I do think he does survive this season. Will Muschamp got 5 years at South Carolina. I think Shane Beamer is going to get 5 years. Shane Beamer has been a better coach than Will Muschamp was. Will Muschamp fell to below 500 after his 5th season overall at South Carolina. They finally made a move on him. Right now, Shane Beamer's record at South Carolina, 20-18. Granted, there's some regression. I think after this year could be about a 5-7 this year, 5-7 season. So I'm not saying with a ton of conviction that I think he survives. Back-to-back 5-7 seasons are hard to endure, even at South Carolina. But I think they give it one more go. They give him 5 years, just like they gave Muschamp, and he's in a make-or-break season in 2025.
I think one problem he has is the schedule. He's not. He's outside that relatively cushy SEC East compared to the West, and 7 of his opponents are ranked in preseason, and in most any preseason publications, you have 7 opponents ranked in the top 25. I think that's going to be hard to overcome. You're giving him another year, but let's go back to that date we've already mentioned. November 9th, Nashville, Cranes High, Vanderbilt Stadium. What if he loses that game? Could he survive that?
Oh no! If he loses to Vanderbilt, I think he's toast. I think he needs to get to 5-7. Not that the 5-7 is some great prize, but if he regresses further in year 4, they were 5-7 last year. If he doesn't manage to win 5 games this year, I think Shane Beamer's gone. However, I have him down at 5-7, and I think that might be just enough to give it one more go. And Shane Beamer can put a spin on things too. I'm not saying he's got the fan base eaten out of the palm of his hand right now, but he can put a good face on things. He can pitch recruiting. Recruiting has been okay up to this point in his tenure. We're not really seeing that on the field. But when you consider the recruiting history, the recruiting standards at South Carolina, I mean, he signed a national top 20 class. National top 20 class last season. He did that the year before as well. I mean, this is bringing in top 20 hauls. Now, the problem is Shane Beamer has lost some talent to the transfer portal. I think he tends to lose more than he gains via transfers, which is not what that program needs, not what any program needs, but certainly not South Carolina. You can't afford to be losing more talent than you gain. I mean, for all the attention that Spencer Rattler got for transferring to South Carolina, overall, I think he's lost more than he's gained to the portal. That has to stop. But I do think he can kind of sell those top 20 recruiting classes and say, hey, give me one more go. Look at the way I've been recruiting. I've been recruiting, a little higher than the history at South Carolina. But he's got to get to at least 5 wins. You go 3-9, 4-8. You lose to Vanderbilt with the Cranes high, as you say. No, he's not getting a year 5. So I think he scratches and claws to a 5th season. Someone who's on a red hot seat coming into this year, John, the hottest seat I think in the SEC as it stands right now is Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman, if not for a clause in his contract, I could have seen him being fired last year. However, he has a contract clause that says if his record since the start of the 2021 season dips below 500, Arkansas can fire him at a discount that would amount to a few $1 million. And right now, his record since the start of 2021 is 20-18. Now, he's been there since 2020, but this contract clause does not include the pandemic season of 2020. It throws that out. And so his record since the start of 2021, 2 games above 500. And I do think that helped save his job last year, as Arkansas knew either this season things get better and they'll be glad they kept him, or things continue to go down the drain and that discount clause will be triggered and they can save a handful of $1 million on his buyout and contribute that to the next coach. So, I mean, I think he's on about as hot as it gets, and we'll get to Billy Napier in a minute because I think he's on a hot seat as well. But I would put Pittman on the hottest seat. How far does he get, John? Does he survive this year, or do you have a date in mind where Arkansas fires Sam Pittman this season?
He doesn't survive the first month.
Okay.
I've got him bidding adieu and riding off into the sunset on September 29th.
September 29th. What game? That would be after the A&M game. They're at College
Yes.
Station, right?
No, the game is in Arlington at Jerry's
Oh,
Palace.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, the neutral
yeah.
site game.
Famed Arkansas alum Jerry Jones. At that juncture, I see Arkansas losing at Oklahoma State, at Auburn. Then it drops to 2-3 with a loss to Texas A&M. And right after that, it's got games against Tennessee and LSU, two teams that could be both ranked in the top 10 or top 15 maybe. And there's another reason that makes this more plausible to me. Offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino. He was hired in this season, and he's got plenty of head coaching experience. So what you could do, you could fire Pittman the day after the loss to A&M, plug Bobby Petrino in there, and the rest of the season becomes an audition. If Bobby Petrino can achieve more success than anticipated, maybe knock off a tough opponent, Ole Miss or Texas, LSU, somebody like that, then they turn back the clock and remember the glory days of what was it about? I don't know, what was his last year there, 2011 or something, when he had that top. I guess they finished about number 5 in the country under Petrino. I just wonder if anybody was thinking about that when he was hired as offensive coordinator.
See, I think it's a long shot that Petrino winds up in the head chair. I mean, it's been a while since his stock was particularly high. I think, at one time there in the early 2010s, that's when things were, before Bobby Petrino hopped on his motorcycle or wrecked his motorcycle, things were going great at Arkansas. Went 10-3 in 2010, went 11-2. In 2011, and then things started okay at Louisville. But it's really been about a decade since Bobby Petrino's stock was, not even hot, particularly warm. He had a losing season in his final year as a head coach at Missouri State at the FCS level. Only had one winning season in 3 years at Missouri State. As Jimbo Fisher's offensive coordinator, failed to produce much positive change in Fisher's last season. And if Sam Pittman is fired this year, I think that probably means Bobby Petrino wasn't able to turn around the Arkansas offense as offensive coordinator. But if they make the move early in the season, as you're saying, I do see the argument of he gets an extended audition as sort of the interim coach, almost an Ed Ogeron situation, right? LSU fired Les Miles early in Les's final season. Ed got the extended audition as the interim, did well enough to keep the job, and they removed the interim tag. I don't think that that's probably how it ends at Arkansas, but you can make the case that if there's any doubt that you might want to see what it looks like under Petrino, to make the move, as you're saying, early in the year at the end of September, give Petrino the next 2 months to prove he can do it. I don't think that's who Arkansas lands on, but you've made a case that maybe that's worth considering. I think Pittman makes it a couple more games because I think they're going to be looking at that clause at Arkansas and waiting until his record since the start of the 2021 season drops below 500, and then they pounce immediately and say thanks for the millions of dollars in savings. And I think that will be triggered with a firing on October 20th. I have Arkansas at 2-5 at that point. That would be on the heels of a loss to LSU. If they start the season 2-5, Pittman's record since 2021 would be 22-23. Hello discount. Hello firing. And so that's why I have October 20th as the day Pittman gets fired, because Arkansas can save themselves millions. At that point, frankly, it would be financially imprudent for Arkansas not to fire Sam Pittman. You would give him a chance to win his way back over 500, still have a not very good season, an average season at best, but he fights his way for 500, and then you're ended up paying him more to fire him. No, if his record drops below 500, sorry, Sam Pittman, and thanks for the memories when the times were good. Then the times were good at one time. They went 9-4 in his second season. But it would be regression at that point. This is year 5 for Sam Pittman. I think when that discount gets triggered, you move on from Sam Pittman, and that's why I have October 20th as the date targeted.
I think that's great in a way because it adds some suspense to the season, to the SEC. I mean, look what we've done already. We've made that November 9th game between Vanderbilt and South Carolina is significant. And now we have October 19th, Arkansas and LSU, a game that easily could be overlooked as significant. And we've made it, you've circled it on your calendar. I think that's a good thing for SEC football.
Yeah, and you look at the following week is against Mississippi State. Now, that could be like a coin flip game. But if Pittman is sitting there one game below 500 since the start of 2021 after a loss to LSU, are you really going to let him go out and beat Mississippi State the following week? And then all of a sudden, you'd have to spend more money to fire him, right? Because he'd be back at 500. So, I mean, it really is an interesting clause. I don't know that, to my recollection, I can't really remember anything like it. I think it's really smart contracting on Arkansas's part. And I almost never say that on behalf of a university, an athletic director, a president. I mean, these guys are almost always getting whipped in contract negotiations by the head coaches and their agents, which is usually Jimmy Sexton. But this is a case of smart contracting where you say, hey, Sam, you go out and win some ball games. You know, it really doesn't make sense for us to fire you because we'd have to pay you more if you can keep that record above 500. But you fail to perform, and it's discount days at the firing line. So, yeah, I mean, I give Arkansas credit for having that in the contract. And frankly, I give Sam Pittman some credit for signing a contract that has that language in it. Now, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I don't know. I kind of respect a guy that says, hey, if I fall below 500, you know, in a several-year span, I accept the consequences. You can fire me at a discount. You still got to pay me something, but you can fire me at a little bit of a discount. I sort of respect that about Pittman.
That tells me Jimmy Sexton is not his agent.
I think Jimmy might actually be at this point, but that's
really maybe the thing about Sam Pittman, longtime assistant coach. I don't know that he's ever been a coordinator, an offensive coordinator. Been a really good offensive line coach. Had a really good reputation as an offensive line coach. So he might have thought to get a head coaching job, hey, hand me the contract, I'll sign. You can draw up the stipulations, I'll sign right there on the dotted line. I think so. I don't think he will leave terribly unhappy. I almost think he didn't anticipate getting this job. I really don't think he did.
And Pittman will turn 63 this season. You could see, I mean, he would still be a very in-demand offensive line coach, even if he were fired as a head coach. So you could say, hey, go ahead, fire me at a discount, hand me my millions of dollars. I got my lake house, and I'm going to go make $1 million as an offensive line coach, do that for a couple more years, and boom, then I'm off to the lake, you know? And I mean, it's almost, in a way, it's almost a win-win situation for him. Either he succeeds this year and keeps his job, or even at a discount, they pay him millions of dollars to go away. He can get an O-line coach job for a couple years and then remember the days when he went 9-4 1 year as Arkansas's coach. You know, I mean, there's something to be said for that. Moving on to our final candidate, John. Florida AD Scott Strickland insists Billy Napier is not on the hot seat. Well, you and I disagree. Napier is 11-14 after 2 seasons, faces a daunting schedule in year 3. I wrote recently, John, that if Florida was gifted a cushier schedule this year, like Missouri's, like Tennessee's, like Ole Miss's, those are 3 of the most favorable schedules in the SEC, Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss. If Florida had a schedule like theirs, I think Billy Napier would win enough games this season to save his job. But that's not the situation he's in. Florida plays 11 Power 4 opponents this season, all in-state rivals, Miami, UCF, and Florida State. UCF was not Power 4 at the time that game was scheduled, but they're in the Big 12 now, so count them. That's 11 Power 4 conference games. No other SEC team plays 11 Power 4 conference opponents during the regular season. And the conference schedule is also very tough. Florida plays Georgia. They play Texas. They play LSU. They play Ole Miss. They play Tennessee. I mean, it is a daunting conference schedule on top of a brutal non-conference schedule. I think the depth chart, the roster, is as good as Billy Napier has had it during his tenure. I think he did the best job he's done yet in the transfer portal. I think he underused the transfer portal his first couple of seasons. That was a mistake. He did a lot better in getting some talent out of the portal this time around. But I think with that schedule, it's going to be too little, too late. And so I have Billy Napier getting through the end of the season. I think they give him the Florida State game because I think Billy Napier's buyout, if he's fired at the end of this year, would be $25 million. I think it's just a tick higher than $25 million. And I know we often say the buyout doesn't matter. These schools, it's like monopoly money to an extent. They're going to fire him anyway. But I do think Florida would prefer that Napier shows just enough progress this year that they can keep him into next season, where either it gets better in 2025 or that buyout would dip below $20 million. So I think they give him all the way to the end of the stretch here, all the way to the Florida State game, to try to scratch and claw and keep his job. But I just think that schedule is too brutal. I think it could end with a 5-game losing streak for Florida because of how tough the schedule is throughout the month of November. I mean, it's a tough schedule wire to wire, but it is brutal at the end. And so I think on December 1st, after the Florida State game, Florida has to swallow the buyout and move on from Billy Napier after 3 seasons.
Yeah, I can't recall a closing schedule as challenging as this one. Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. I mean, all of those teams have top 10 potential.
Mm-hmm.
A really good team would struggle against that schedule, and now you have a team that's, I think, still mediocre. It is improved. It's a better version of mediocrity this season than last. Depth was a real issue. But against that schedule, there's not enough depth to pull you through. I mean, you lose a couple of guys along the way, and still depth issues could become more paramount. I just think I don't understand how this schedule was ever made. Okay, SEC schedule, that's different. But why would you play Miami, Florida State, and UCF in the same year? I just don't understand that, because that will be the game of the year. For UCF, that will be the game of the year, and that will be a huge game for Miami too. So they'll probably get the best shot from those teams. I mean, it's not out of the. I mean, there's a chance Florida could end up 4-8. That's not out of the realm of possibilities the way I see it.
Given the schedule, I agree. I have them, maybe more like 5-7, 6-6, but 4-8 is certainly in the conversation. And I think we'll look back on a couple games from this past season that Billy Napier, that really could have cost him. I mean, they blew a game at Missouri last November that Florida really had every opportunity to win, and Missouri won it right at the close. Missouri won 33-31. That was, in a lot of ways, a game that Florida was very well positioned to win, probably should have won. They also lost to Arkansas last year, 39-36. I mean, those are 2 games that go the other way. Florida's playing in a bowl game last year. Florida's winning 7. If they win the bowl game, they're maybe, they're getting to 8 wins if they win the bowl game. And then, maybe you could spin the narrative of, hey, this was just a brutal schedule this year. This was a 1-year bump in the road, but look at what he did in 2023, say winning 8 games if they would have won the bowl game and won those games against Arkansas and Missouri last year. I know that's not the Florida standard. That's not where they want to be. But I think, if you're trying to say, hey, ride this out another year, this was just a bad case of scheduling, we're sticking with it. But I don't think you can make that argument when it's already been back-to-back losing seasons. I think that argument's a little easier to make if they're 8-5 last year, but they weren't. They lost to Arkansas in a close one. They blew it against Missouri. They went 5-7. I don't think he can survive, another losing season or even a 6-6 season. And considering the schedule, I don't have Florida being any better than 6-6, which is have them moving on from Billy Napier and having a stomach that huge buyout on December 1st.
When I look at Florida's schedule, Samford on September 7th. That's the only game I see as a sure win. I don't think you can count at Mississippi State September 21st a sure win. Those cowbells ringing. For whom the cowbell tolls, Billy Napier.
How good is that job if it opens, John? I mean, there was a time where Florida, was one of the best programs in the country during the Steve Spurrier era, during the Urban Meyer era. But those guys are more the exception than the rule at Florida. Spurrier won a national championship and turned Florida into one of the most dominant programs throughout the 90s. Urban Meyer wins 2 championships at Florida. Dan Mullen made New Year's 6 bowl games in his first 3 seasons before the wheels fell off in year 4. But by and large, greatness is more the exception than the rule at Florida for whatever reason. I'm not saying that greatness shouldn't be expected at Florida. It's a great recruiting state. It's a competitive recruiting state, but there's still a lot of talent in the state, in every corner of the state. But like I said, I mean, what Spurrier and Meyer did, that's not necessarily the norm when you look at throughout the course of Florida's history. And now with Oklahoma and Texas in the conference, as you said earlier, the conference only gets tougher. So where do you see, if that job were to open, how appealing is that job? And a name I always think about when it's Florida is Lane Kiffin. Is Florida good enough of a job that Lane Kiffin could or should consider leaving Ole Miss when, I mean, you have Ole Miss on the list of teams that could contend for a national championship this season? At the very least, Ole Miss is a strong playoff contender this year. That's how we view them. Is Florida enough of a draw, enough of a sell to get Lane Kiffin when Lane Kiffin's already making $9 million and can have a playoff program at Ole Miss?
If I were Lane Kiffin's advisor, I would say stay where you are. I mean, I think he's a terrific coach, and I think he could do well at Florida, but I don't know that he could do Steve Spurrier well or Urban Meyer well. One of the things about Florida, it is a great recruiting state. That's tremendous, but everybody recruits Florida. Mm-hmm. It seems like every school in the country has made some inroads in Florida, and I think there are a lot of athletes in Florida. It's not like if you're in Georgia and the Georgia Bulldogs are the dominant program. You want to go play for the Dogs in Athens. Or in Alabama, when you've got Alabama or Auburn, make a pick. Both schools, Alabama certainly has had more success, but Auburn has good tradition too. Or take LSU, a lot of good players in Louisiana, and there's no school comparable to that in state. But in Florida, just in state, we've named a few on the Gators schedule. Miami, and Miami seems to be more of a factor in recruiting now through NIL with John Ruiz down there. So you have UCF is a huge school. I mean, they've got so many. They might have, I don't know, but they might have a decent NIL program going. And then, of course, Florida State. Florida State has been down at times. It was down when Urban Meyer was there. But you look at it now, Florida State easily could have made the playoffs. The quarterback didn't get hurt last year. It's in the playoffs. So, yeah, you've got tough sledding there. I think it's really a challenging job. But I think it's not like you can go into Florida and unify the state and just lock down the state and say, I get the best players in Florida every year. Yeah, if you could do that, you'd be a national contender every season. But if I were Lane Kiffin, I'd stay at Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin knows how to work the transfer portal. He's making that work at Ole Miss. I think it's remarkable what he's done there at Ole Miss. And you could say, well, you can't sustain that success. in this era, I'm not so sure that you can't.
Yeah, he's got the NIL thing rolling at Ole Miss, particularly as it pertains to transfers. He looks at it as an NFL GM almost. I mean, he evaluates decisions like that. There's no salary cap in college football, but Lane sort of looks at it as like whatever they can raise in NIL, that is the salary cap that he has, and closely evaluates how to use that money, and that's one of the reasons why Ole Miss has been a dominant player in the portal. It's also one of the reasons I think why they lose some players in the portal too, is some tough decisions have to be made, and sometimes money can be allocated elsewhere if a guy leaves. So I think he'd be a great fit for the Florida job. He reminds me of Spurrier as an offense first guy, a former college quarterback. Spurrier, of course, was a more accomplished college quarterback, but they both have that mindset. And coming on the heels of Billy Napier, Florida's been a middle of the pack offensive team these past couple seasons under Napier, and I don't know that I see that changing this season. I think they'll be okay offensively, but sort of middle of the pack again in the SEC on offense. I mean, Lane Kiffin, I think, would really excite that fan base with what he does on offense. It's a fan base that wants to win. It's also a fan base that wants to be entertained. Spurrier kind of spoiled them on that front. I mean, he was entertaining on and off the field. Urban Meyer's teams obviously were highly entertaining as well. With the Tebow offense, Spurrier, of course, had the fun and gun, and Lane Kiffin has his basically up tempo air raid type of system, the warp speed offense. It's really balanced. It's not just throwing it all over the yard. But your quarterback is positioned to put up some pretty good numbers. You're positioned to score a lot of points in that system. He's aggressive. He likes to go for it on fourth downs. Heck, he even wears the visor, John. It's not like he'd have to reinvent himself to be like a Spurrier Part 2. He wears the visor as it is. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why Florida, if that job opens, should look at Lane Kiffin. Whether Lane Kiffin should leave Ole Miss and what he's got brewing there for Florida, I think is a different conversation. I think it would be a hard decision for Lane to leave Ole Miss, but whether Florida should be interested, yeah. If Billy Napier doesn't get it done this year and they move on, I would put Lane at the top of the hiring list if I'm Florida.
When you look at these coaches we've talked about, 4 coaches that we've designated as hot seat potential or already there, no potential necessary. Which of these coaches do you think can help themselves the most through the media? Which coach can talk the best game, and maybe in so doing win some goodwill with the fan base and say, maybe he's right. Maybe we need to give him another shot. We've seen that happen before, where a coach is really, really good in the public realm, and he gets himself another year or so. Which coach do you think is most capable of doing that of these 4?
I think 2 guys. I think it's Sam Pittman and Shane Beamer. Clark Lea and Billy Napier hurt themselves. They don't help themselves with their media game. Clark Lea starts talking and you fall asleep within 2 minutes. Vanderbilt starts playing and you fall asleep within 2 minutes. Billy Napier, even you go back to what he said at media days, and it's a lot of platitudes. I don't think that's what the Florida fan base wants. They're used to the quipster Steve Spurrier. Napier, he's not much excitement. He's not moving the needle much when he's behind the microphone. Sam Pittman presents the good guy image. I think Arkansas fans really, really want him to succeed. They were loving him as the jukebox hero after the 9-4 season. This guy fits Arkansas's brand, but you still got to win some games. But I think his ability to win over the fan base and like the good guy status of Sam Pittman, that plus that contract clause probably bought him another season, bought him year 5 when you combine the fact that I think the fan base likes him or wants to like him, and that buyout clause in his contract. I think that's why he's still here. I don't think that can buy him another season, though. I think it already bought him the extra year. Shane Beamer's an interesting one. Beamer gets under the skin of all these other fan bases. I mean, Tennessee fans can't stand Shane Beamer. Kentucky fans, Florida fans. I mean, Shane Beamer is just that guy that other fan bases, they just cannot stand. I mean, he's celebrating, after every little thing on the sideline. They win a non-conference game against a group of 5 opponent, and Beamer's won a conference championship. But I think South Carolina fans, when the going is good, I mean, Shane Beamer's their guy. I think they like him. They like him as being the guy getting under the skin of other fan bases. So, but I mean, you got to win some games. Otherwise, you're just like that twerp that annoys other teams, but you lose all the time on the playground, right? You got to win enough. But I think Beamer's a guy that could talk his way into a 5th season through his media game and with that fan base. He's seen as a nuisance elsewhere, but he's yours if he's at South Carolina. But he's got to win just enough to make that routine work.
Admittedly, I like seeing him on the sidelines, and I think his antics, and because the impact it has on other fans, he amuses me. So don't get me wrong. Although I predicted this season would mark the end of the Shane Beamer era, I'm pulling for the guy. I'd like to see him make it to another season. And I think of Shane Beamer as a great winner. Not that he wins a lot, but he can make the most of a win. I mean, he's a guy if you had another say if Arkansas pulled off a big upset, if you tell you would rather have Shane Beamer behind the microphone afterward than Sam Pittman, who's just kind of the quintessential good guy and will be complimentary to the other team. Shane he'll be pumping that fist, and he'll have that look on his face like, more of this is coming.
He's gonna rub the loser's nose in it just a little bit. As we always say on the pod, we think the world of these guys. Of course we do. Nonetheless, John has 3 of the 4 getting fired. I have 3 of the 4 getting fired this season. We disagree on who exactly are going to get fired, but 3 of the 4. Although we think the world of you, we have you getting fired this season. We hope you think the world of us. If you liked what you heard today, take a moment. Hit that rating, review, subscribe on your podcast app. Those ratings and reviews help us find more listeners, and we hope you'll be back with us next week as we continue to navigate the offseason on SEC Football Unfiltered.